research laboratories at the University of Pennsylvania, the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and the Yale Art Gallery, which was completed in 1951 and was its first major building. Mr. Kahn was returning from India, where he had gone to oversee further work on his partly completed complex of buildings for the Institute of Management at Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad.
Oh, I found that word somewhere. Yeah.
One of many.
Continue.
Kahn works at various stages of development when he died. After a week's absence, he was on his way back to meet his Monday morning class in architecture at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. His body was picked up by the police and taken to the city morgue. Identification was made on a tentative basis through his passport, which showed that he had just returned to the country by way of John F. Kennedy International Airport from London and earlier from Bombay.
Right.
The passport gave Mr. Kahn's office and home addresses in Philadelphia. So that was where his home address was scratched out.
Right.
And his office address was still visible on the passport.
Well, but the weird thing was he had a suitcase with his home address on it. And he had something else with his home address. So this is the explanation in the book is very thorough about the weirdness surrounding.
And then some people said they notified the Philadelphia police, but they failed to notify his wife.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's sort of, she had to call someone.
The secretary was involved.
Yeah, there was some weird, roundabout way that Esther found out.
As time passed without word from her husband, Mrs. Kahn placed calls overseas and finally to the New York police. Mm-hmm. They disclosed that his body had been taken to the medical examiner's office and that they'd notified the Philadelphia police. Mr. Kahn was a small man whose white hair and bow tie were often in disarray, but his modest physical appearance was in sharp contrast to the vastness of his influence on architects both in America and abroad. He fit into neither the organic school of Frank Lloyd Wright nor the other major modern movement, the lean, pure European modern of Le Corbusier or Mies van der Rohe, but sought to redefine architecture in a fundamental way for himself. That redefinition for Mr. Kahn involved searching for the essential qualities not of a particular building, but of architecture itself. His somewhat fundamentalist approach led him toward strong, simple geometric forms and basic materials such as brick and concrete, which he often left in its unfinished state as a better means of expressing the material's nature. Mm-hmm. Mr. Kahn was fond of speaking in the most basic terms about architecture. One of his favorite lines, often repeated in writings and lectures, was that his work was an attempt to discover, quote, what the building wants to be.
Right.
He frequently said that he wanted to rethink architecture, not from the volume of its history, but from what he liked to call volume zero. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to read that. It's like a 6-page article, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But you can kind of see how well regarded he was in the architecture field. But so let's now go back to the beginning and talk about his early life. Louis Isidore Kahn was born on February 20th, 1901 in Livonia, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time. Now it is modern-day Estonia. His parents were Leopold and Bertha Chmielowski, who were Russian Jews.
Right, and his
birth name is... Don't
have to. But it was not Louis.
Itzy Lieb. It's... it's ITZE-LEIB. Mm-hmm. And I do understood that Lieb is the Russian form of Leopold. So, from what I could pick up from some of the things that I saw. One of the defining moments of his childhood was when at the age of 3, he was staring at a stove full of hot coals, and he was transfixed by the light of the glowing coals, so he ended up pulling some of them out of the stove, put them in his apron, which of course set the apron on fire, and it burned his neck and the lower half of his face, as well as some of his hands.
That's crazy. He was 3?
Yep. His father thought it would be better if he died, but his mother decided that if he could survive such a scarring, he would be a great man. As an adult, he would be known for these scars.
I guess she was right.
I don't think many people knew of this story until it was related in the 2003 documentary about Lou's life. Now, in 1904, Leopold Chmielowski immigrated to the United States. He needed to get out of the country because the Russo-Japanese War was on, and it was feared that he would be forced into military service. 2 years later, in 1906, Louis, his mother Bertha, and 2 siblings followed, and the family settled in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They were not much better off financially in their new home. They lived on the top floor of a tenement building. Lou, as he became known, proved to be very talented in both art and music. The family could not afford pencils, so he would burn sticks in the backyard to create charcoal to draw with. His drawings would eventually win prizes, but it was his ability to play piano that helped out his family. I wasn't quite sure. The story, once again, was related in the documentary, and I'm not sure how he made the acquaintance of this woman, but she was a very well-off woman, and she gave him her old piano so he could play it. And because their apartment was very small, and they could not fit the piano in the room without getting rid of his bed, so he ended up sleeping on top of the piano.
Oh, I read about that.
So he was so good at playing that he was eventually hired to accompany silent movies at the theater. And one of the interviews, or actually the only interview that his wife Esther gave, she was to talk about how they didn't have a lot of money when they were first married, and so instead of going out with their friends, they would invite them over, and they would basically, it sounded like they would read from magazines and kind of shoot words at him, and he would just on the spot compose music. And so, and she said that he told her once that he would never have been very, very good at playing piano, but he would have been very good at composing, which makes a lot of sense about just being able to come up with things out of his head. By 1912, the family had taken the more anglicized Jewish name of Kahn. Lou attended Central High School and the Public Industrial Art School. He often waited to go to class at the last bell because other kids would tease him and call him Scarface. Now, Kahn received a scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied under French architect Paul Cret and graduated in 1924. He was a late bloomer, architecturally speaking. Wasn't formally attached to any architectural firm. It sounded more like he was a freelancer and that he kind of went where there was work. In 1926, he was the chief designer of the sesquicentennial buildings in Philadelphia. And then for most of 1928 and 29, he traveled throughout Europe. When he returned in 1930, he married fellow Penn graduate and medical researcher Esther Virginia Israeli.
Yeah. She was pretty smart.
She was extremely smart. She said that the first time she heard him talk about architecture, she didn't understand a word that he was saying, but was attracted to him all the same.
And she was, class-wise, she was sort of above him.
Yeah, I kind of picked up on that. Mm-hmm. The one thing people can agree on when it comes to Louis Kahn is that he was undeniably charismatic. Mm-hmm. He was a short guy who was only 5'6".
Oh, I didn't know he was that short.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And his signature was rumpled suits and bow ties. And then, of course, there were the scars on his face. But he had the innate ability to inspire loyalty in those associated with him. So he was kind of... he wasn't a bombastic type of charismatic person. I think he was more of a quiet... Sometimes you meet people, they're just magnetic. I think that was probably him. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find a great deal about Esther, but I'm assuming she came from money because she seemed to support Kahn for a good portion of their marriage. They lived with her parents for 35 of the 44 years that they were married.
Wow.
And it was her salary as a medical researcher that supported them. Mm-hmm. It was also with her money that Kahn launched his own firm in 1935. Some of his early projects were housing for factory workers or labor union halls. He did design a few modernist-style homes in the Philadelphia suburbs, but I read somewhere along the line that he typically stuck to public buildings because he didn't get along very well with private individual clients.
That's interesting.
You know. In 1940, Lou and Esther's daughter, Sue Ann, was born. But the addition of a child at home did not make him more domestic. He practically lived at his office where he had a bench to sleep on, and he would often send his laundry out to be cleaned from there as well.
Oh, my.
In 1942, Lou joined with fellow architect Oscar Stonarov to form the firm Stonarov and Kahn. In 1947, he would begin teaching at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. But it wasn't until 1950 that he found himself architecturally. So he was essentially 50 at the time. So I said earlier he was a late bloomer, so definitely like that. From 1950 to 1951, he was the architect in residence at the American Academy in Rome. And while he was living there, he visited Greece and Egypt and became entranced by the geometric forms of ancient ruins. Perhaps it was this self-discovery that inspired what would become a rather messy personal life. In 1945, a young architect in training named Anne Ting was hired at Stonarov and Kahn. Ting was born in 1920 to two American missionaries serving in China.
Whoa, so she was a lot younger than him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, jeez.
He did have a penchant for the young ladies, as we always see in this show.
It's a pattern.
It is a pattern. She grew up in China, spoke Mandarin?
Fluently.
Okay. Yeah, fluently. She graduated from Radcliffe College in 1942.
Oh, wow.
And then went on to study architecture at Harvard University with Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer. She graduated in 1944 and was among the first female students to graduate from the architecture program at Harvard. She was hired at Stonarov and Kahn when a friend of hers quit. After working there for 4 years, Anne sat for the architecture licensing exam in 1949. Initially, the proctor refused to administer the test to her. Jerk.
Yeah.
But she was allowed to take it, and not only did she pass, she was the only woman to be licensed that year. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that is probably why there are so few female architects in history, because of situations such as that.
Jerks.
Anne was quite intelligent. You can pretty much tell from what I just said. She was very mathematically inclined. In 1950, she designed a modular building system for children, which was called the Ting toy.
Really?
Yeah. And if you Google it, there was this black and white photo of her sitting on the floor with the pieces of it. It's very large pieces, so it was more like a large scale type of building thing.
Yeah. Is that like the Frobel gifts?
Yeah, I guess, but probably on a larger scale. She developed an intense relationship with Louis Kahn. They partnered on many projects as Ting was interested in geometric forms, which complemented Kahn's newly developed style. It was never really stated when their relationship turned sexual, but in 1953, Anne became pregnant. In later interviews, she states that Kahn didn't really seem to be fazed by the development, but as an unmarried woman in the early 1950s, Anne had a lot to lose.
Wait, in 53 she's pregnant, and when was the first child born by Esther?
1940.
Okay.
She moved to Rome for a year and studied with a structural engineer named Pier Luigi Nervi. She gave birth to her daughter Alexandra in 1954. The whole time she was away, Lou wrote letters to her, and some of them she shared in the documentary because she was interviewed in it. And it's very clear that Lou had deep feelings for her and missed having her by his side. Unfortunately, when she returned to Philadelphia, she discovered that he had been having an affair with another architect on his staff.
Oh, this is the third woman.
Nope, different woman.
Oh, no.
This woman was named Marie Kuo, and she was from an aristocratic Chinese family that had immigrated.
Oh, there's pictures of her in the book, and I was wondering who that was.
Yep, that was...
she did not have a child by him.
No.
Okay.
She, as I said, was from an aristocratic Chinese family that immigrated to the U.S. and had fallen